Chapter 1 of The Road to Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Phil Chenevert. The Road to Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 1, The Way to Butterfield. "Please, miss," said the Shaggy Man, "can you tell me the road to Butterfield?" Dorothy looked him over. Yes, he was Shaggy, all right, but there was a twinkle in his eye that seemed pleasant. "Oh, yes," she replied, "I can tell you, but it isn't this road at all." "No?" "You cross the 10-acre lot, follow the lane to the highway, go north to the 5 branches, and take, let me see—" "To be sure, miss. See as far as Butterfield if you like," said the Shaggy Man. "You take the branch next to the willow stump, I believe, or else the branch by the gopher holes, or else— Won't any of 'em do, miss?" "Course not, Shaggy Man. You must take the right road to get to Butterfield. And is that the one by the gopher stump, or—" "Dear me!" cried Dorothy. "I shall have to show you the way. You're so stupid. Wait a minute till I run in the house and get my sunbonnet." The Shaggy Man waited. He had an oat straw in his mouth, which he chewed slowly as if it tasted good, but it didn't. There was an apple tree beside the house, and some apples had fallen to the ground. The Shaggy Man thought they would taste better than the oat straw, so he walked over to get some. A little black dog with bright brown eyes dashed out of the farmhouse and ran madly toward the Shaggy Man, who had already picked up 3 apples and put them in one of the big wide pockets of his shaggy coat. The little dog barked and made a dive for the Shaggy Man's leg, but he grabbed the dog by the neck and put it in his big pocket along with the apples. He took more apples afterward, for many were on the ground, and each one that he tossed into his pocket hit the little dog somewhere upon the head or back and made him growl. The little dog's name was Toto, and he was sorry he had been put in the Shaggy Man's pocket. Pretty soon Dorothy came out of the house with her sunbonnet, and she called out, "Come on, Shaggy Man, if you want me to show you the road to Butterfield." She climbed the fence into the 10-acre lot, and he followed her, walking slowly and stumbling over the little hillocks in the pasture, as if he was thinking of something else and did not notice them. "My, but you're clumsy," said the little girl. "Are your feet tired?" "No, miss, it's my whiskers. They tire very easily in this warm weather," said he. "I wish it would snow, don't you?" "Course not, Shaggy Man," replied Dorothy, giving him a severe look. "If it snowed in August it would spoil the corn and the oats and the wheat, and then Uncle Henry wouldn't have any crops, and that would make him poor, and—" "Never mind," said the Shaggy Man. "It won't snow, I guess. Is this the lane?" "Yes," replied Dorothy, climbing another fence. "I'll go as far as the highway with you." "Thankee, miss. You are very kind for your size, I'm sure," said he gratefully. "It isn't everyone who knows the road to Butterfield," Dorothy remarked as she tripped along the lane, "but I've driven there many a time with Uncle Henry, and so I believe I could find it blindfolded." "Don't do that, miss," said the Shaggy Man earnestly. "You might make a mistake." "I won't," she answered, laughing. "Here's the highway. Now it's the second—no, the third turn to the left, or else it's the fourth. Let's see. The first one is by the elm tree, and the second is by the gopher holes, and then—" "Then what?" he inquired, putting his hands in his coat pockets. Toto grabbed a finger and bit it. The Shaggy Man took his hand out of that pocket quickly and said, "Oh!" Dorothy did not notice. She was shading her eyes from the sun with her arm, looking anxiously down the road. "Come on," she commanded. "It's only a little way farther, so I may as well show you." After a while they came to the place where 5 roads branched in different directions. Dorothy pointed to one and said, "That's it, Shaggy Man." "I'm much obliged, miss," he said, and started along another road. "Not that one!" she cried. "You're going wrong." He stopped. "I thought you said that other was the road to Butterfield," said he, running his fingers through his shaggy whiskers in a puzzled way. "So it is, but I don't want to go to Butterfield, miss." "You don't?" "Of course not. I wanted you to show me the road so I shouldn't go there by mistake." "Oh, where do you want to go, then?" "I'm not particular, miss." This answer astonished the little girl, and it made her provoked, too, to think she had taken all this trouble for nothing. "There are a good many roads here," observed the Shaggy Man, turning slowly around like a human windmill. "Seems to me a person could go most anywhere from this place." Dorothy turned around, too, and gazed in surprise. There were a good many roads, more than she had ever seen before. She tried to count them, knowing there ought to be 5, but when she had counted 17 she grew bewildered and stopped, for the roads were as many as the spokes of a wheel, and ran in every direction from the place where they stood, so if she kept on counting she was likely to count some of the roads twice. "Dear me!" she exclaimed, "there used to be only 5 roads, highway and all, and now, why, where's the highway, Shaggy Man?" "Can't say, miss," he responded, sitting down upon the ground as if tired with standing. "Wasn't it here a minute ago?" "I thought so," she answered, greatly perplexed, "and I saw the gopher holes, too, and the dead stump, but they're not here now. These roads are all strange, and what a lot of them there are! Where do you suppose they all go to?" "Roads," observed the Shaggy Man, "don't go anywhere. They stay in one place, so folks can walk on them." He put his hand in his side pocket and drew out an apple, quick before Toto could bite him again. The little dog got his head out this time and said "Bow wow!" so loudly that it made Dorothy jump. "Oh, Toto!" she cried. "Where did you come from?" "I brought him along," said the Shaggy Man. "What for?" she asked. "To guard these apples in my pocket, miss, so no one would steal them." With one hand the Shaggy Man held the apple, which he began eating, while with the other hand he pulled Toto out of his pocket and dropped him to the ground. Of course Toto made for Dorothy at once, barking joyfully at his release from the dark pocket. When the child had patted his head lovingly, he sat down before her, his red tongue hanging out one side of his mouth, and looked up into her face with his bright brown eyes, as if asking her what they should do next. Dorothy didn't know. She looked around her anxiously for some familiar landmark, but everything was strange. Between the branches of the many roads were green meadows and a few shrubs and trees, but she couldn't see anywhere the farmhouse from which she had just come, or anything she had ever seen before, except the Shaggy Man and Toto. Besides this, she had turned around and around so many times, trying to find out where she was, that now she couldn't even tell which direction the farmhouse ought to be in, and this began to worry her and make her feel anxious. "I'm 'fraid, Shaggy Man," she said with a sigh, "that we're lost." "That's nothing to be afraid of," he replied, throwing away the core of his apple and beginning to eat another one. "Each of these roads must lead somewhere, or it wouldn't be here, so what does it matter?" "I want to go home again," she said. "Well, why don't you?" said he. "I don't know which road to take." "That is too bad," he said, shaking his shaggy head gravely. "I wish I could help you, but I can't. I'm a stranger in these parts." "Seems as if I were, too," she said, sitting down beside him. "It's funny. A few minutes ago I was home, and I just came to show you the way to Butterfield, so I shouldn't make a mistake and go there, and now I'm lost myself and don't know how to get home." "Have an apple," suggested the Shaggy Man, handing her one with pretty red cheeks. "I'm not hungry," said Dorothy, pushing it away. "But you may be, tomorrow. Then you'll be sorry you didn't eat the apple," said he. "If I am, I'll eat the apple then," promised Dorothy. "Perhaps there won't be any apple then," he returned, beginning to eat the red-cheeked one himself. "Dogs sometimes can find their way home better than people," he went on. "Perhaps your dog can lead you back to the farm." "Will you, Toto?" asked Dorothy. Toto wagged his tail vigorously. "All right," said the girl, "let's go home." Toto looked around a minute and dashed up one of the roads. "Goodbye, Shaggy Man," called Dorothy, and ran after Toto. The little dog pranced briskly along for some distance, when he turned around and looked at his mistress questioningly. "Oh, don't 'spect me to tell you anything. I don't know the way," she said. "You'll have to find it yourself." But Toto couldn't. He wagged his tail and sneezed and shook his ears and trotted back where they had left the Shaggy Man. From here he started along another road, then came back and tried another, but each time he found the way strange and decided it would not take them to the farmhouse. Finally, when Dorothy had begun to tire with chasing after him, Toto sat down panting beside the Shaggy Man and gave up. Dorothy sat down too, very thoughtfully. The little girl had encountered some queer adventures since she had come to live at the farm, but this was the queerest of them all. To get lost in 15 minutes so near to her home, and in the unromantic state of Kansas, was an experience that fairly bewildered her. "Will your folks worry?" asked the Shaggy Man, his eyes twinkling in a pleasant way. "I suppose so," answered Dorothy with a sigh. "Uncle Henry says there's always something happening to me, but I've always come home safe at the last. So perhaps he'll take comfort and think I'll come home safe this time." "I'm sure you will," said the Shaggy Man, smilingly nodding at her. "Good little girls never come to any harm, you know. For my part, I'm good too, so nothing ever hurts me." Dorothy looked at him curiously. His clothes were shaggy, his boots were shaggy and full of holes, and his hair and whiskers were shaggy, but his smile was sweet and his eyes were kind. "Why didn't you want to go to Butterfield?" she asked. "Because a man lives there who owes me 15 cents, and if I went to Butterfield and he saw me, he'd want to pay me the money. I don't want money, my dear." "Why not?" she inquired. "Money," declared the Shaggy Man, "makes people proud and haughty. I don't want to be proud and haughty. All I want is to have people love me, and as long as I own the Love Magnet everyone I meet is sure to love me dearly." "The Love Magnet! Why, what's that?" "I'll show you, if you won't tell anyone," he answered in a low, mysterious voice. "There isn't anyone to tell 'cept Toto," said the girl. The Shaggy Man searched in one pocket carefully, and in another pocket, and in a third. At last he drew out a small parcel wrapped in crumpled paper and tied with a cotton string. He unwound the string, opened the parcel, and took out a bit of metal shaped like a horseshoe. It was dull brown and not very pretty. "This, my dear," said he impressively, "is the wonderful Love Magnet. It was given me by an Eskimo in the Sandwich Islands, where there are no sandwiches at all, and as long as I carry it every living thing I meet will love me dearly." "Why didn't the Eskimo keep it?" she asked, looking at the magnet with interest. "He got tired of being loved and longed for some one to hate him. So he gave me the magnet, and the very next day a grizzly bear ate him." "Wasn't he sorry then?" she inquired. "He didn't say," replied the Shaggy Man, wrapping and tying the Love Magnet with great care and putting it away in another pocket. "But the bear didn't seem sorry a bit," he added. "Did you know the bear?" asked Dorothy. "Yes, we used to play ball together in the Caviar Islands. The bear loved me because I had the Love Magnet. I couldn't blame him for eating the Eskimo, because it was his nature to do so." "Once," said Dorothy, "I knew a hungry tiger who longed to eat fat babies, because it was his nature too, but he never ate any because he had a conscience." "This bear," replied the Shaggy Man with a sigh, "had no conscience, you see." The Shaggy Man sat silent for several minutes, apparently considering the cases of the bear and the tiger, while Toto watched him with an air of great interest. The little dog was doubtless thinking of his ride in the Shaggy Man's pocket, and planning to keep out of reach in the future. At last the Shaggy Man turned and inquired, "What's your name, little girl?" "My name's Dorothy," said she, jumping up again. "But what are we going to do? We can't stay here forever, you know." "Let's take the 7th road," he suggested. "7 is a lucky number for little girls named Dorothy." "The 7th from where?" "From where you begin to count." So she counted 7 roads, and the 7th looked just like all the others, but the Shaggy Man got up from the ground where he had been sitting and started down this road, as if sure it was the best way to go, and Dorothy and Toto followed him. End of chapter 1. Of the Road to Oz by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2. Dorothy Meets Button-Bright. The 7th road was a good road, and curved this way and that, winding through green meadows and fields covered with daisies and buttercups, and past groups of shady trees. There were no houses of any sort to be seen, and for some distance they met with no living creature at all. Dorothy began to fear they were getting a good way from the farmhouse, since here everything was strange to her. But it would do no good at all to go back where the other roads all met, because the next one they choose might lead her just as far from home. She kept on beside the Shaggy Man, who whistled cheerful tunes to beguile the journey, until by and by they followed a turn in the road and saw before them a big chestnut tree making a shady spot over the highway. In the shade sat a little boy dressed in sailor clothes, who was digging a hole in the earth with a bit of wood. He must have been digging some time, because the hole was already big enough to drop a football into. Dorothy and Toto and the Shaggy Man came to a halt before the little boy, who kept on digging in a sober and persistent fashion. "Who are you?" asked the girl. He looked up at her calmly. His face was round and chubby, and his eyes were big, blue, and earnest. "I'm Button-Bright," said he. "But what's your real name?" she inquired. "Button-Bright. That isn't a really truly name," she exclaimed. "Isn't it?" he asked, still digging. "Course not. It's just a thing to call you by. You must have a name." "Must I?" "To be sure. What does your mamma call you?" He paused in his digging and tried to think. "Papa always said I was bright as a button, so mamma always called me Button-Bright," he said. "What is your papa's name?" "Just Papa." "What else?" "Don't know." "Never mind," said the Shaggy Man, smiling. "We'll call the boy Button-Bright, as his mamma does. That name is as good as any, and better than some." Dorothy watched the boy dig. "Where do you live?" she asked. "Don't know," was the reply. "How did you come here?" "Don't know," he said again. "Don't you know where you come from?" "No," said he. "Why, he must be lost," she said to the Shaggy Man. She turned to the boy once more. "What are you going to do?" she inquired. "Dig," said he. "But you can't dig forever. And what are you going to do then?" she persisted. "Don't know," said the boy. "But you must know something," Dorothy declared, getting provoked. "Must I?" he asked, looking up in surprise. "Of course you must. What must I know?" "What's going to become of you, for one thing," she answered. "Do you know what's going to become of me?" he asked. Not 'zactly," she admitted. "Do you know what's going to become of you?" he continued earnestly. "I can't say I do," replied Dorothy, remembering her present difficulties. The Shaggy Man laughed. "No one knows everything, Dorothy," he said. "But Button-Bright doesn't seem to know anything," she declared. "Do you, Button-Bright?" He shook his head, which had pretty curls all over it, and replied with perfect calmness, "Don't know." Never before had Dorothy met with anyone who could give her so little information. The boy was evidently lost, and his people would be sure to worry about him. He seemed 2 or 3 years younger than Dorothy, and was prettily dressed, as if someone loved him dearly and took much pains to make him look well. How, then, did he come to be in this lonely road, she wondered. Near Button-Bright on the ground lay a sailor hat with a gilt anchor on the band. His sailor trousers were long and wide at the bottom, and the broad collar of his blouse had gold anchors sewed on its corners. The boy was still digging at his hole. "Have you ever been to sea?" asked Dorothy. "To see what?" answered Button-Bright. "I mean, have you ever been where there's water?" "Yes," said Button-Bright. "There's a well in our back yard." "You don't understand!" cried Dorothy. "I mean, have you ever been on a big ship floating on a big ocean?" "Don't know," said he. "Then why do you wear sailor clothes?" "Don't know," he answered again. Dorothy was in despair. "You're just awful stupid, Button-Bright," she said. "Am I?" he asked. "Yes, you are." "Why?" looking up at her with big eyes. She was going to say "don't know," but stopped herself in time. "That's for you to answer," she replied. "It's no use asking Button-Bright questions," said the Shaggy Man, who had been eating another apple. "But someone ought to take care of the poor little chap, don't you think? So he'd better come along with us." Toto had been looking with great curiosity in the hole which the boy was digging, and growing more and more excited every minute, perhaps thinking that Button-Bright was after some wild animal. The little dog began barking loudly and jumped into the hole himself, where he began to dig with his tiny paws, making the earth fly in all directions. It splattered over the boy. Dorothy seized him and raised him to his feet, brushing his clothes with her hand. "Stop that, Toto!" she called. "There aren't any mice or woodchucks in that hole, so don't be foolish." Toto stopped, sniffed at the hole suspiciously, and jumped out of it, wagging his tail as if he had done something important. "Well," said the Shaggy Man, "let's start on, or we won't get anywhere before night comes." "Where do you expect to get to?" asked Dorothy. "I'm like Button-Bright. I don't know," answered the Shaggy Man with a laugh. "But I've learned from long experience that every road leads somewhere, or there wouldn't be any road. So it's likely that if we travel long enough, my dear, we will come to some place or another in the end. What place it will be we can't even guess at this moment, but we're sure to find out when we get there." "Why, yes," said Dorothy. "That seems reasonable, Shaggy Man." End of Chapter 2. Of the Road to Oz by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3. A Queer Village. Button-Bright took the Shaggy Man's hand willingly, for the Shaggy Man had the love magnet, you know, which was the reason Button-Bright had loved him at once. They started on, with Dorothy on one side and Toto on the other, the little party trudging along more cheerfully than you might have supposed. The girl was getting used to queer adventures, which interested her very much. Wherever Dorothy went, Toto was sure to go, like Mary's little lamb. Button-Bright didn't seem a bit afraid or worried because he was lost, and the Shaggy Man had no home, perhaps, and was as happy in one place as in another. Before long they saw ahead of them a fine big arch spanning the road, and when they came nearer they found that the arch was beautifully carved and decorated with rich colors. A row of peacocks with spread tails ran along the top of it, and all the feathers were gorgeously painted. In the center was a large fox's head, and the fox wore a shrewd and knowing expression, and had large spectacles over its eyes, and a small golden crown with shiny points on top of its head. While the travelers were looking with curiosity at this beautiful arch, there suddenly marched out of it a company of soldiers, only the soldiers were all foxes, dressed in uniforms. They wore green jackets with yellow pantaloons, and their little round caps and their high boots were a bright red color. Also, there was a big red bow tied about the middle of each long bushy tail. Each soldier was armed with a wooden sword having an edge of sharp teeth set in a row, and the sight of these teeth at first caused Dorothy to shudder. A captain marched in front of the company of fox soldiers, his uniform embroidered with gold braid to make it handsomer than the others. Almost before our friends realized it, the soldiers had surrounded them on all sides, and the captain was calling out in a harsh voice, "Surrender! You are our prisoners!" "What's a pris'ner?" asked Button-Bright. "A prisoner is a captive," replied the fox captain, strutting up and down with much dignity. "What's a captive?" asked Button-Bright. "You're one," said the captain. That made the Shaggy Man laugh. "Good afternoon, Captain," he said, bowing politely to all the foxes and very low to their commander. "I trust you are all in good health and that your families are all well." The fox captain looked at the Shaggy Man, and his sharp features grew pleasant and smiling. "We're pretty well, thank you, Shaggy Man," said he, and Dorothy knew that the Love Magnet was working, and that all the foxes now loved the Shaggy Man because of it. But Toto didn't know this, for he began barking angrily and tried to bite the captain's hairy leg, where it showed between his red boots and his yellow pantaloons. "Stop, Toto!" cried the little girl, seizing the dog in her arms. "These are our friends." "Why, so we are," remarked the captain, in tones of astonishment. "I thought at first we were enemies, but it seems you are friends instead. You must come with me to see King Dox." "Who's he?" asked Button-Bright, with earnest eyes. "King Dox of Foxville, the great and wise sovereign who rules over our community." "What's sovereign and what's community?" inquired Button-Bright. "Don't ask so many questions, little boy." "Why?" "Ah, why indeed!" exclaimed the captain, looking at Button-Bright admiringly. "If you don't ask questions you will learn nothing. True enough, I was wrong. You're a very clever little boy, come to think of it, very clever indeed. But now, friends, please come with me, for it is my duty to escort you at once to the royal palace." The soldiers marched back through the arch again, and with them marched the Shaggy Man, Dorothy, Toto, and Button-Bright. Once through the opening they found a fine big city spread out before them, all the houses of carved marble and beautiful colors. The decorations were mostly birds and other fowl, such as peacocks, pheasants, turkeys, prairie chickens, ducks, and geese. Over each doorway was carved a head representing the fox who lived in that house, this effect being quite pretty and unusual. As our friends marched along, some of the foxes came out on the porches and balconies to get a view of the strangers. These foxes were all handsomely dressed, the girl foxes and women foxes wearing gowns of feathers woven together effectively and colored in bright hues, which Dorothy thought were quite artistic and decidedly attractive. Button-Bright stared until his eyes were big and round, and he would have stumbled and fallen more than once had not the Shaggy Man grasped his hand tightly. They were all interested, and Toto was so excited he wanted to bark every minute and to chase and fight every fox he caught sight of. But Dorothy held his little wriggling body fast in her arms and commanded him to be good and behave himself. So he finally quietened down, like a wise doggy, deciding there were too many foxes in Foxville to fight all at once. By and by they came to a big square, and in the center of the square stood the royal palace. Dorothy knew it at once because it had over its great door the carved head of a fox, just like the one she had seen on the arch, and this fox was the only one who wore a golden crown. There were many fox soldiers guarding the door, but they bowed to the captain and admitted him without question. The captain led them through many rooms, where richly dressed foxes were sitting on beautiful chairs or sipping tea which was being passed around by fox servants in white aprons. They came to a big doorway covered with heavy curtains of cloth of gold. Beside this doorway stood a huge drum. The fox captain went to this drum and knocked his knees against it, first one knee and then the other, so that the drum said boom, boom. "You must all do exactly what I do," ordered the captain. So the Shaggy Man pounded the drum with his knees, and so did Dorothy, and so did Button Bright. The boy wanted to keep on pounding it with his little fat knees, because he liked the sound of it, but the captain stopped him. Toto couldn't pound the drum with his knees, and he didn't know enough to wag his tail against it, so Dorothy pounded the drum for him, and that made him bark, and when the little dog barked, the fox captain scowled. The golden curtains drew back far enough to make an opening, through which marched the captain with the others. The broad, long room they entered was decorated in gold, with stained glass windows of splendid colors. In the corner of the room, upon a richly carved golden throne, sat the Fox King, surrounded by a group of other foxes, all of whom wore great spectacles over their eyes, making them look solemn and important. Dorothy knew the King at once, because she had seen his head carved on the arch and over the doorway of the palace. Having met with several other kings in her travels, she knew what to do, and at once made a low bow before the throne. The Shaggy Man bowed too, and Button Bright bobbed his head and said hello. "Most wise and noble potentate of Foxville," said the captain, addressing the King in a pompous voice, "I humbly beg to report that I found these strangers on the road leading to your foxy Majesty's dominions, and have therefore brought them before you as is my duty." So, said the King, looking at them keenly. "What brought you here, strangers?" "Our legs, may it please your royal hairiness," replied the Shaggy Man. "What is your business here?" was the next question. "To get away as soon as possible," said the Shaggy Man. The King didn't know about the magnet, of course, but it made him love the Shaggy Man at once. "Do just as you please about going away," he said, "but I'd like to show you the sights of my city, and to entertain your party while you are here. We feel highly honored to have little Dorothy with us, I assure you, and we appreciate her kindness in making us a visit, for whatever country Dorothy visits is sure to become famous." This speech greatly surprised the little girl, who asked, "How did your Majesty know my name?" "Why, everybody knows you, my dear," said the Fox King. "Don't you realize that? You are quite an important personage since Princess Ozma of Oz made you her friend." "Do you know Ozma?" she asked, wondering. "I regret to say that I do not," he answered sadly, "but I hope to meet her soon. You know the Princess Ozma is to celebrate her birthday on the 21st of this month." "Is she?" said Dorothy. "I didn't know that." "Yes. It is to be the most brilliant royal ceremony ever held in any city in Fairyland, and I hope you'll try to get me an invitation." Dorothy thought a moment. "I'm sure Ozma would invite you if I asked her," she said. "But how could you get to the Land of Oz and the Emerald City? It's a good way from Kansas." "Kansas!" he exclaimed, surprised. "Why, yes, we are in Kansas now, aren't we?" she returned. "What a queer notion!" cried the Fox King, beginning to laugh. "Whatever made you think this is Kansas?" "I left Uncle Henry's farm only about 2 hours ago. That's the reason," she said, rather perplexed. "But tell me, my dear, did you ever see so wonderful a city as Foxville in Kansas?" he questioned. "No, your Majesty." "And haven't you traveled from Oz to Kansas in less than half a jiffy, by means of the silver shoes and the magic belt?" "Yes, your Majesty," she acknowledged. "Then why do you wonder that an hour or two could bring you to Foxville, which is nearer to Oz than it is to Kansas?" "Dear me!" exclaimed Dorothy. "Is this another fairy adventure?" "It seems to be," said the Fox King, smiling. Dorothy turned to the Shaggy Man, and her face was grave and reproachful. "Are you a magician, or a fairy in disguise?" she asked. "Did you enchant me when you asked the way to Butterfield?" The Shaggy Man shook his head. "Who ever heard of a shaggy fairy?" he replied. "No, Dorothy, my dear, I'm not to blame for this journey in any way, I assure you. There's been something strange about me ever since I owned the Love Magnet, but I don't know what it is any more than you do. I didn't try to get you away from home at all. If you want to find your way back to the farm, I'll go with you willingly, and do my best to help you." "Never mind," said the little girl thoughtfully. "There isn't so much to see in Kansas as there is here, and I guess Aunt Em won't be very much worried, that is, if I don't stay away too long." "That's right," declared the Fox King, nodding approval. "Be contented with your lot, whatever it happens to be, if you are wise. Which reminds me that you have a new companion on this adventure. He looks very clever and bright." "He is," said Dorothy, and the Shaggy Man added, "That's his name, your Royal Foxiness, Button Bright." End of Chapter 3. Of the Road to Oz by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 4. King Dox. It was amusing to note the expression on the face of King Dox as he looked the boy over, from his sailor hat to his stubby shoes, and it was equally diverting to watch Button Bright stare at the King in return. No fox ever beheld a fresher, fairer child's face, and no child had ever before heard a fox talk, or met with one who dressed so handsomely and ruled so big a city. I am sorry to say that no one had ever told the little boy much about fairies of any kind. This being the case, it is easy to understand how much this strange experience startled and astonished him. "How do you like us?" asked the King. "Don't know," said Button Bright. "Of course you don't. It's too short an acquaintance," returned his Majesty. "What do you suppose my name is?" "Don't know," said Button Bright. "How should you? Well, I'll tell you. My private name is Dox, but a king can't be called by his private name. He has to take one that is official. Therefore my official name is King Renard IV. Renard with the accent on the Ren." "What's Ren?" asked Button Bright. "How clever!" exclaimed the King, turning a pleased face toward his counselors. "This boy is indeed remarkably bright. What's Ren, he asks, and of course Ren is nothing at all by itself. Yes, he's very bright indeed." "That question is what your Majesty might call foxy," said one of the counselors, an old gray fox. "So it is," declared the King. Turning again to Button Bright, he asked, "Having told you my name, what would you call me?" "King Dox," said the boy. "Why?" "'Cause Wren's nothing at all," was the reply. "Good, very good indeed. You certainly have a brilliant mind. Do you know why 2 and 2 make 4? "No," said Button Bright. "Clever, clever indeed. Of course you don't know. Nobody knows why. We only know it's so, and can't tell why it's so. Button Bright, those curls and blue eyes do not go well with so much wisdom. They make you look youthful, and hide your real cleverness. Therefore I will do you a great favor. I will confer upon you the head of a fox, so that you may hereafter look as bright as you really are." As he spoke, the King waved his paw toward the boy, and at once the pretty curls and fresh round face and big blue eyes were gone, while in their place a fox's head appeared upon Button Bright's shoulders, a hairy head with a sharp nose, pointed ears, and keen little eyes. "Oh, don't do that!" cried Dorothy, shrinking back from her transformed companion with a shocked and dismayed face. "Too late, my dear, it's done. But you also shall have a fox head if you can prove you're as clever as Button Bright." "I don't want it. It's dreadful!" she exclaimed, and hearing this verdict, Button Bright began to boo-hoo just as if he were still a little boy. "How can you call that lovely head dreadful?" asked the King. "It's a much prettier face than he had before, to my notion, and my wife says I'm a pretty good judge of beauty. Don't cry, little fox boy. Laugh and be proud, because you are so highly favored. How do you like the new head, Button Bright?" "Don't know," sobbed the child. "Please, please change him back again, your Majesty," begged Dorothy. King Reynard the Fourth shook his head. "I can't do that," he said. "I haven't the power, even if I wanted to. No, Button Bright must wear his fox head, and he'll be sure to love it dearly as soon as he gets used to it." Both the Shaggy Man and Dorothy looked grave and anxious, for they were sorrowful that such a misfortune had overtaken their little companion. Toto barked at the fox boy once or twice, not realizing it was his former friend who now wore the animal head. But Dorothy cuffed the dog and made him stop. As for the foxes, they all seemed to think Button Bright's new head very becoming, and that their king had conferred a great honor on this little stranger. It was funny to see the boy reach up to feel of his sharp nose and wide mouth, and wail afresh with grief. He wagged his ears in a comical manner, and tears were in his little black eyes. But Dorothy couldn't laugh at her friend just yet, because she felt so sorry. Just then 3 little fox princesses, daughters of the king, entered the room, and when they saw Button Bright, one exclaimed, "How lovely he is!" and the next one cried in delight, "How sweet he is!" and the third princess clapped her hands with pleasure and said, "How beautiful he is!" Button Bright stopped crying and asked timidly, "Am I?" "In all the world there is not another face so pretty," declared the biggest fox princess. "You must live with us always and be our brother," said the next. "We shall all love you dearly," the third said. This praise did much to comfort the boy, and he looked around and tried to smile. It was a pitiful attempt, because the fox face was new and stiff, and Dorothy thought his expression more stupid than before the transformation. "I think we ought to be going now," said the Shaggy Man uneasily, for he didn't know what the king might take into his head to do next. "Don't leave us yet, I beg you," pleaded King Reynard. "I intend to have several days of feasting and merrymaking in honor of your visit." "Have it after we're gone, for we can't wait," said Dorothy decidedly. But seeing this displeased the king, she added, "If I'm going to get Ozma to invite you to her party, I'll have to find her as soon as possible, you know." In spite of all the beauty of Foxville and the gorgeous dresses of its inhabitants, both the girl and the Shaggy Man felt they were not quite safe there, and would be glad to see the last of it. "But it is now evening," the king reminded them, "and you must stay with us until morning, anyhow. Therefore I invite you to be my guests at dinner, and to attend the theater afterward and sit in the royal box. Tomorrow morning, if you really insist upon it, you may resume your journey." They consented to this, and some of the fox servants led them to a suite of lovely rooms in the big palace. Button Bright was afraid to be left alone, so Dorothy took him into her own room, while a maid fox dressed the little girl's hair, which was a bit tangled, and put some bright fresh ribbons in it. Another maid fox combed the hair on poor Button Bright's face and head and brushed it carefully, tying a pink bow to each of his pointed ears. The maids wanted to dress the children in fine costumes of woven feathers, such as all the foxes wore, but neither of them consented to that. "A sailor suit and a fox head do not go well together," said one of the maids, "for no fox was ever a sailor that I can remember." "I'm not a fox!" cried Button Bright. "Alas, no," agreed the maid. But you've got a lovely fox head on your skinny shoulders, and that's almost as good as being a fox." The boy, reminded of his misfortune, began to cry again. Dorothy petted and comforted him, and promised to find some way to restore him his own head. "If we can manage to get to Ozma," she said, "the Princess will change you back to yourself in half a second. So you just wear that fox head as comfortably as you can, dear, and don't worry about it at all. It isn't nearly as pretty as your own head, no matter what the foxes say, but you can get along with it for a little while longer, can't you?" "Don't know," said Button Bright doubtfully, but he didn't cry any more after that. Dorothy let the maids pin ribbons to her shoulders, after which they were ready for the King's dinner. When they met the Shaggy Man in the splendid drawing room of the palace, they found him just the same as before. He had refused to give up his shaggy clothes for new ones, because if he did that he would no longer be the Shaggy Man, he said, and he might have to get acquainted with himself all over again. He told Dorothy he had brushed his shaggy hair and whiskers, but she thought he must have brushed them the wrong way, for they were quite as shaggy as before. As for the company of foxes assembled to dine with the strangers, they were most beautifully costumed, and their rich dresses made Dorothy's simple gown, and Button Bright's sailor suit, and the Shaggy Man's shaggy clothes look commonplace. But they treated their guests with great respect, and the King's dinner was a very good dinner indeed. Foxes, as you know, are fond of chicken and other fowl, so they served chicken soup and roasted turkey and stewed duck and fried grouse and broiled quail and goose pie, and as the cooking was excellent, the King's guests enjoyed the meal and ate heartily of the various dishes. The party went to the theater, where they saw a play acted by foxes dressed in costumes of brilliantly colored feathers. The play was about a fox girl who was stolen by some wicked wolves and carried to their cave, and just as they were about to kill her and eat her, a company of fox soldiers marched up, saved the girl, and put the wicked wolves to death. "How do you like it?" the King asked Dorothy. "Pretty well," she answered. "It reminds me of one of Mr. Aesop's fables." "Don't mention Aesop to me, I beg of you!" exclaimed King Dox. "I hate that man's name. He wrote a good deal about foxes, but always made them out cruel and wicked, whereas we are gentle and kind, as you may see." "But his fables showed you to be wise and clever, and more shrewd than other animals," said the Shaggy Man thoughtfully. "So we are. There is no question about our knowing more than men do," replied the King proudly. "But we employ our wisdom to do good instead of harm, so that horrid Aesop did not know what he was talking about." They did not like to contradict him, because they felt he ought to know the nature of foxes better than men did. So they sat still and watched the play, and Button Bright became so interested that for a time he forgot he wore a fox head. Afterward they went back to the palace and slept in soft beds stuffed with feathers, for the foxes raised many fowl for food and used their feathers for clothing and to sleep on. Dorothy wondered why the animals living in Foxville did not wear just their own hairy skins as wild foxes do. When she mentioned it to King Dox, he said they clothed themselves because they were civilized. "But you were born without clothes," she observed, "and you don't seem to me to need them." "So were human beings born without clothes," he replied, "and until they became civilized they wore only their natural skins. But to become civilized means to dress as elaborately and prettily as possible, and to make a show of your clothes, so your neighbors will envy you, and for that reason both civilized foxes and civilized humans spend most of their time dressing themselves." "I don't," declared the Shaggy Man. "That is true," said the King, looking at him carefully, "but perhaps you are not civilized." After a sound sleep and a good night's rest, they had their breakfast with the king, and then bade his majesty good-bye. "You've been very kind to us, 'cept poor Button Bright," said Dorothy, "and we've had a nice time in Foxville." "Then," said King Dox, "perhaps you'll be good enough to get me an invitation to Princess Ozma's birthday celebration." "I'll try," she promised, "if I see her in time." "It's on the 21st, remember," he continued, "and if you'll just see that I'm invited, I'll find a way to cross the dreadful desert into the marvelous Land of Oz. I've always wanted to visit the Emerald City, so I'm sure it was fortunate you arrived here just when you did, you being Princess Ozma's friend and able to assist me in getting the invitation." "If I see Ozma, I'll ask her to invite you," she replied. The Fox King had a delightful luncheon put up for them, which the Shaggy Man shoved in his pocket, and the Fox Captain escorted them to an arch at the side of the village, opposite the one by which they had entered. Here they found more soldiers guarding the road. "Are you afraid of enemies?" asked Dorothy. "No, because we are watchful and able to protect ourselves," answered the Captain. "But this road leads to another village peopled by big, stupid beasts, who might cause us trouble if they thought we were afraid of them." "What beasts are they?" asked the Shaggy Man. The Captain hesitated to answer. Finally he said: "You will learn all about them when you arrive at their city, but do not be afraid of them. Button Bright is so wonderfully clever, and has now such an intelligent face, that I'm sure he will manage to find a way to protect you." This made Dorothy and the Shaggy Man rather uneasy, for they had not so much confidence in the Fox boy's wisdom as the Captain seemed to have. But as their escort would say no more about the beasts, they bade him good-bye and proceeded on their journey. Chapter 5. Ode to Oz by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5. The Rainbow's Daughter. Toto, now allowed to run about as he pleased, was glad to be free again and able to bark at the birds and chase the butterflies. The country around them was charming, yet in the pretty fields of wild flowers and groves of leafy trees were no houses whatever, or sign of any inhabitants. Birds flew through the air, and cunning white rabbits darted along the tall grasses and green bushes. Dorothy noticed even the ants toiling busily along the roadway, bearing gigantic loads of clover seed, but of people there were none at all. They walked briskly on for an hour or two, and even little Button Bright was a good walker and did not tire easily. At length, as they turned a curve in the road, they beheld just before them a curious sight. A little girl, radiant and beautiful, shapely as a fairy and exquisitely dressed, was dancing gracefully in the middle of the lonely road, whirling slowly this way and that, her dainty feet twinkling in sprightly fashion. She was clad in flowing, fluffy robes of soft material that reminded Dorothy of woven cobwebs, only it was colored in soft tintings of violet, rose, topaz, olive, azure and white, mingled together most harmoniously in stripes which melted one into the other with soft blendings. Her hair was like spun gold, and flowed around her in a cloud, no strand being fastened or confined by either pin or ornament or ribbon. Filled with wonder and admiration, our friends approached and stood watching this fascinating dance. The girl was no taller than Dorothy, although more slender, nor did she seem any older than our little heroine. Suddenly she paused and abandoned the dance, as if for the first time observing the presence of strangers. As she faced them, shy as a frightened fawn, poised upon one foot as if to fly the next instant, Dorothy was astonished to see tears flowing from her violet eyes and trickling down her lovely rose-hued cheeks. That the dainty maiden should dance and weep at the same time was indeed surprising, so Dorothy asked in a soft, sympathetic voice, "Are you unhappy, little girl?" "Very," was the reply. "I am lost." "Why, so are we," said Dorothy, smiling, "but we don't cry about it." "Don't you? Why not?" "'Cause I've been lost before and always got found again," answered Dorothy simply. "But I've never been lost before," murmured the dainty maiden, "and I'm worried and afraid." "You were dancing," remarked Dorothy in a puzzled tone of voice. "Oh, that was just to keep warm," explained the maiden quickly. "It was not because I felt happy or gay, I assure you." Dorothy looked at her closely. Her gauzy flowing robes might not be very warm, yet the weather wasn't at all chilly, but rather mild and balmy like a spring day. "Who are you, dear?" she asked gently. "I'm Polychrome," was the answer. "Polly whom?" "Polychrome. I'm the daughter of the Rainbow." "Oh!" said Dorothy with a gasp. "I didn't know the Rainbow had children, but I might have known it before you spoke. You couldn't really be anything else." "Why not?" inquired Polychrome, as if surprised. "Because you're so lovely and sweet." The little maiden smiled through her tears, came up to Dorothy and placed her slender fingers in the Kansas girl's chubby hand. "You'll be my friend, won't you?" she said pleadingly. "Of course. And what is your name?" "I'm Dorothy, and this is my friend Shaggy Man, who owns the Love Magnet, and this is Button Bright, only you don't see him as he really is, because the Fox King carelessly changed his head into a fox head. But the real Button Bright is good to look at, and I hope to get him changed back to himself some time." The Rainbow's Daughter nodded cheerfully, no longer afraid of her new companions. "But who is this?" she asked, pointing to Toto, who was sitting before her, wagging his tail in the most friendly manner and admiring the pretty maid with his bright eyes. "Is this also some enchanted person?" "Oh, no, Polly. I may call you Polly, mayn't I? Your whole name's awful hard to say." "Call me Polly if you wish, Dorothy." "Well, Polly, Toto's just a dog, but he has more sense than Button Bright, to tell the truth, and I'm very fond of him." "So am I," said Polychrome, bending gracefully to pat Toto's head. "But how did the Rainbow's Daughter ever get on this lonely road and become lost?" asked the Shaggy Man, who had listened wonderingly to all this. "Why, my father stretched his rainbow over here this morning, so that one end of it touched this road," was the reply, "and I danced upon the pretty rays, as I love to do, and never noticed I was getting too far over the bend in the circle. Suddenly I began to slide, and I went faster and faster, until at last I bumped on the ground at the very end. Just then father lifted the rainbow again, without noticing me at all, and though I tried to seize the end of it and hold fast, it melted away entirely, and I was left alone and helpless on the cold, hard earth." "It doesn't seem cold to me, Polly," said Dorothy, "but perhaps you're not warmly dressed." "I'm so used to living nearer the sun," replied the Rainbow's Daughter, "that at first I feared I would freeze down here. But my dance has warmed me up some, and now I wonder how I am ever to get home again. Won't your father miss you, and look for you, and let down another rainbow for you?" "Perhaps so, but he's busy just now, because it rains in so many parts of the world at this season, and he has to set his rainbow in a lot of different places. What would you advise me to do, Dorothy?" "Come with us," was the answer. "I'm going to try to find my way to the Emerald City, which is in the Fairyland of Oz. The Emerald City is ruled by a friend of mine, the Princess Ozma, and if we can manage to get there I'm sure she will know a way to send you home to your father again." "Do you really think so?" asked Polychrome anxiously. "I'm pretty sure." "Then I'll go with you," said the little maid, "for travel will help keep me warm, and father can find me in one part of the world as well as another, if he gets time to look for me." "Come along, then," said the Shaggy Man cheerfully, and they started on once more. Polly walked beside Dorothy a while, holding her new friend's hand, as if she feared to let it go, but her nature seemed as light and buoyant as her fleecy robes, for suddenly she darted ahead and whirled round in a giddy dance. Then she tripped back to them with sparkling eyes and smiling cheeks, having regained her usual happy mood and forgotten all her worries about being lost. They found her a charming companion, and her dancing and laughter, for she laughed at times like the tinkling of a silver bell, did much to enliven their journey and keep them contented. Chapter 6